Good evening, Mr. Bedi.
Good evening, Jyotsna. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thanks so
I,
much for joining me.
my pleasure, my pleasure.
No,
Wonderful
it's
to be here.
entirely
Looking
my
forward to.
pleasure to have you today between your shooting and the book promotions, which can get quite out of control.
I know
But
it's a whole new world for me, whole new
isn't
world,
it?
but very
Sometimes I feel
exciting.
like I think it's easier to write the book than to go out and promote it.
It's almost as much hard work.
It is, it is. But I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. Of course, Kabir Bedi needs no introduction. He's an actor par excellence, that voice, always envious, Mr. Bedi. But after reading your book, Stories I Must Tell, is how a book should be written. I mean, it's taken me through with you on your journey of hope, love, pain, everything that you have, I think, wanted to bring out has come out. And I think that is really what makes a book a success. But I want to begin by asking you, sir, why did you decide to write this book now? What was it? Was it a means, of fulfilling some sort of a cathartic experience? And of course, I'm very, very envious that you had all that correspondence, all those emails with you through all this time.
Yes, just I'd come to a point where I just had to write my story. I'd thought about it for long enough. I'd been caught up in the paralysis of analysis as to how to tell it. And eventually I had a breakthrough when the pandemic started, and I just understood the form it would take. And then I just wrote it like a raging river. It was unstoppable. The book almost wrote itself. And I had these letters, and I believe letters lend great immediacy and sincerity to a narrative, because it's not just me talking, it's other people talking through their voices and enhancing the narrative that I'm putting out. And it just feels, I mean, that letter from my mother to her in-laws to be, asking for their blessings and in allowing them, their son, to marry her, is one of those poignant letters. And there's so many wonderful letters in there from Pratima, from Parveen, from my son, all of which add a certain texture to the book, which is wonderful to have. And I just kept these letters. I knew they'd matter someday, and they certainly did in my book, because they gave me that the voices, their voices that I needed for my narrative.
No, absolutely. I think there was so much poignancy as well in some of those letters. It was, it was like you were taking us through your journey, and we became a part of your journey as well, Mr. Bedi. But I want to ask you this. The book also, of course, it goes behind the public persona. It actually shows you for what you are, for all your success, for all your failings, for also the very fact that, you're an introvert person. Nobody would actually believe that. I mean,
Yeah.
you're a big star and you're actually a very introvert person.
I am. I'm sort of naturally shy. I have no problem speaking acting on a stage or talking to 5,000 people, but sort of general social interactions, I'm never sure that people are interested in what I'm going to say, or whether I'm fascinated by what they say. I don't know. It just kind of makes me feel a little awkward, and I'm shy by nature, so I try and compensate for it in a number of ways, because in my business you have to deal with a lot of people, and you can't afford to be shy. And if you are, and that shyness is often misunderstood for being arrogance or feeling superior over them. So you have to reach out and send them cards, or send thank you notes, or send them things that make them feel that you didn't feel that way. And that was part of that's been part of my journey. The thing is, the reason you feel so involved in my journey is because I've written it in almost cinematic terms. You're there in the major scenes of my life, watching it happen. In terms of the emotion I felt, the situations I was in, the dilemmas I faced, and what I thought. Men are in some ways unfortunate, because they're supposed to be the strong ones. They're supposed to be the ones that take care of everything, protect everybody. They're not supposed to show emotion and break down and cry. And this is a huge burden that men carry. And there's a bit of that in me too. But the fact is that when I chose to write, I said I will be as honest and vulnerable as possible and share my emotions, because men do have emotions and we do feel things deeply. And I just wanted to share that experience also with the readers, that uh, I'm more than a pretty face. I also feel, I think, I am sensitive to what happens to me. I'm affected by what happens to me, and I can express it too, given the platform. And my book gave me that platform. So it's wonderful that I'm able to share that experience with you in the immediacy with which it happened to me. And that was my intention, to create a narrative that you couldn't stop reading. Uh, because I'd made a few attempts at my book before, and I'd thrown away those manuscripts because I just wasn't interested in them. They didn't hold me. They didn't compel me to keep reading. And when I found the form that I wanted, I was able to write it in a way that holds you there, making it the kind of riveting narrative that compels you to keep reading. So that was my intention, because I can get bored with books very easily. And if I read an autobiography, there's nothing but praise for what somebody did all his life, my eyes glaze over after the first 20 pages. And I really wanted to rise above that and say, no, my story is, yes, I've had a remarkable life, I've had a very unusual life, but it's a journey of being human, of the wonder of being human, the joys of it, the heartbreak of it, the setbacks, the euphoric moments, the loves, the losses. All that's part of the journey of being human. And all of us, in our own ways, have this journey. Mine might be at a slightly different level because it crosses three continents and three film industries. But the human being in the center of it all remains the same. And the dilemmas I faced, I've shared with you.
So how did you decide what not to carry? Because I'm sure this is not everything.
Tell you what, the difference between writing fiction and writing fact is, in fiction, you don't know enough. In fact, you know too much. I know so much about my life. I could write a 1,000-page book, but who's going to read a 1,000-page book? So, given the fact that I chose to tell it as a series of stories within the structure of my book, there's certain things that I just had to leave out. In other words, things that were not directly connected with those stories. And as a result, there's still a lot of stories that I have to tell. This book tells in its totality the story of my life, but it's structured as a series of stories. And what's important there is that in telling those stories, I didn't want to go down every alleyway and byway and scenic route that I happen to see along the way, because people lose interest in what happens next. And so those are things I had to leave out. So there's lots of interesting details that I couldn't put in, but the trade-off was write your story as crisply, interestingly, and evocatively as possible in 300 pages, or write a 500-600-page book. And I chose to write the shorter, snappier, more evocative narrative.
But like I said in the beginning, there's definitely more books out there. You've proved it right from the beginning. You were talking about, the book has to grip you from the beginning. Oh my God, your book gripped, and I don't want to give out too much. But when you begin with the Beatles, and when you begin with interviewing the Beatles, I have to say that ingenuity to get to the Beatles. I mean, I had double respect for you after reading how you got that interview.
Yeah. That's the kind of grit and determination which the young start out with, I was working for India Radio because I had to pay my fees at St. Stephen's College because my parents' very idealistic lives. There wasn't much money in the bank. But that led to the opportunity that when the Beatles came into town, I persuaded them to give me the tape recorder. I persuaded them to give me the badge. And I went to get the interview with the Beatles. Of course, the whole Delhi press corps were trying to do the same thing. How I beat them to it, that's part of the story in my book. But the bottom line is, I guess the vulnerability of their manager. And I knew who their manager was, and the rest of the Delhi press corps didn't. So I found him. I played on his vulnerability because I was a Beatles fan. I knew what his vulnerability was. And I pressured him into giving me this interview by essentially by saying that the government of India is demanding it. And All India Radio was a government was a
That was
government
brilliant.
company. So I wasn't entirely wrong, and I was representing it. So I was demanding the interview. But it got me through that door with the Beatles. And of course, what happened in that uh, interview, of course, will remain in the book. You must read that. I talked to John Lennon about drugs, and what he said again is in the book. But it was the journey of getting the interview that was so um, the passion of a young man trying to prove himself. And the aftermath of that interview, which is equally dramatic, where All India Radio treated it so badly that even though they played it without any fanfare, they actually taped over that interview.
And they taped over.
Because they didn't have money for tapes. I mean, the backroom boys didn't know. They thought just another program, we've got to tape another program over it. But I was so appalled by what they'd done that it made me think about life. It made me think about, do I want to work with these people, put all my energy, creativity, and the best years of my life into making a career with people who don't get it? Um, it just changed everything for me. And then I had to go through all the options I had in life, which I've detailed. I could be the foreign service, be a journalist, a tourist guide, various things. I won't bore you with the details. But the fact is, at the end of that process, I caught a train to Bombay with 700 rupees in my pocket and said, I am going to be a film director. And that's what I set out to be.
Yes. I was holding my head when you actually spoke, when you'd actually written about your tape being taped over, which is normal once upon a time as well in the media industry. But I mean, to tape over Beatles interview, it was blasphemy for me.
It was broadcasting gold. They could have played it forever. I could have sold it to any network in the world for a fortune. But of course, my loyalty to All India Radio prevented me from doing that. But like I said, in a sense, I have to thank those backroom boys who taped over because it made me think about life. As I said in my book, crises are points of power. At the time, it may seem terrible. When you lose a job, when you lose your way along something, you think, oh God, I can't survive this. It's the worst situation I could ever face. But that is a point of power because you suddenly realize you can choose a number of paths in front of you that you hadn't even thought of before because everything was happily chugging along rail lines that were set for you, and you didn't need to think about what else you could do. Now you can think about what the options are, and other doors open. And that opened the doors to my going to Bombay at that time, Mumbai today, and that led to everything else. So, in a sense, I have to thank those boys in the back room for their insensitivity because it put my life on a whole new course. Or I might have just been working as a producer for Doordarshan or India Radio today. Not a bad profession, but it's not quite the same as the adventures I've had.
Not at all, not at all. But the 60s was such a brilliant time to be alive, right? Creatively.
It was fantastic.
So envious listening to the kind of people you were interacting with, just ordinary people. You think ordinary people, but all these big names just sitting with you. You're talking to them after work, or you're meeting them at work, or you're meeting them at college. And one of those big snippets that stood out for me in the book was when you were talking about acting in the Julius Caesar play, and about how Caesar had been murdered twice, once by Brutus and once by Kapil Sibal, who was playing.
That's what the college
rag
talk said. Yes. Kapil and I had a wonderfully jokey relationship always, and he was always a very loud, well-spoken guy, and he achieved a lot. He became such a senior minister in the Congress governments, etc. But it was a time when, I wanted to be on the debating team at St. Stephen's, more than even dramatics and acting, which I did at St. Stephen's and other colleges. I wanted to be on the debating team. But the debating team had these giants who were seniors to me. They were in MA, and there was Montek Singh Ahluwalia, there was Prabhat Patnaik, there was Ram Chopra, there was Arun Maira. And you can't beat these guys in debates, So I got onto the B team of debating, and I was sent to the other colleges. and also often to the women's colleges, which had its compensations. But debating was my real passion too. Those are also stories I've shared in my book.
Please, everybody, do get a copy of the book, The Stories I Must Tell. I'm telling you, every chapter, every page is worth your reading it. And so you moved from Bollywood, and I think one of the reasons you moved away from the Indian industry, as you mentioned, is because you can't dance and sing around trees. How tough was it really for you?
Well, being an actor who'd done Shakespeare, who'd done Tughlaq, who'd done serious work in the theater, I didn't see myself as a singing, dancing star. And I just want to be clear, I love singing and dancing on screen. I watch it, I enjoy it. I think Bollywood does it better than anybody in the world. I love watching it. I just can't do it. So that was one of the things that made me think that I have to think beyond Bollywood if I want a career for a lifetime. Because if you didn't sing and dance in those days, there was no chance you could be a successful leading man. All the leading men of the era, Dharmender, Rajesh Khanna, Vinod Khanna, Rajat Kumar, even the greats, Raj Kapoor, Dilip Kumar, Devanand, all sang songs. There was no question. That was a major source of revenue. And it's an art form. In the same way that nobody questions why women and men sing in opera, song and dance numbers are the opera of Bollywood. And they do it better than anybody. So I don't question it. I just realized I couldn't do it. So it wasn't hard for me to say no. But it did mean that I had to think beyond and I had to reinvent myself in some way if I wanted a career as an actor.
And you did reinvent yourself. But James Bond, what was that? Was that in your mind the pinnacle of success? Of course, I mean, you've got a lot to thank Europe and you've got a lot to thank Italy for. But James Bond is another league.
No, absolutely. That was one of the great achievements. I mean, what I achieved in Europe was something extraordinary, and that can only be explained in its entire significance because I've written about it in my book. It's hard to explain it in a soundbite, but I was a megastar in Europe. But being in a Bond film, that was something really special. Not only being in a Bond film, being in a Bond film, the first Indian actor to be in a Bond film. I was cast correctly. I was playing a Sikh. I was, and the biggest thrill of all, being in the Bond film, was coming back to India to shoot it. There we were, overlooking the Lake Palace in Udaipur, in this dreamlike setting, dining with Roger Moore and John Glenn, the director, and the Broccoli family. And I'm thinking, I must have died and gone to heaven. An Indian actor shooting a Bond film in India in such a fantastic setting. It was absolutely ethereal. And then, of course, when you are in a Bond film, there's a whole universe of Bond film lovers in the world out there. And all of them get seriously interested in you when you play any role of any importance in a Bond film. And you get millions of fan requests all over the thing. So acting in a Bond film was certainly very, very special. Playing Sandokan in Europe was equally, if not more special, but the Bond film has to be one of the highlights of my life, yes.
Of course. So, of all these big stars, you just spoke about Roger Moore. I mean, my favorite, Rock Hudson. You had Audrey Hepburn turn up just right next to you. Gina Lollobrigida, who invited you out for dinner. Which meeting was the most special one, that you remember the most? Lovingly, I guess.
I've met so many wonderful and interesting people in my life. I must say, my meeting with Federico Fellini, who was this god of cinema at the time, touched me greatly. I loved meeting Sean Connery, but my meeting with Audrey Hepburn has to be very special. Because Audrey Hepburn at that time, she was one of the actresses of the golden age of Hollywood. She'd won Oscars, she'd won BAFTA, she'd won every award there was to win. And I had followed her from my college days, with this doe-like devotion to her. And there she was sitting coming up to me in a party in Sardinia, overlooking the sea, in this idyllic setting, saying, "I'd like to talk to you." I think, Audrey Hepburn? My God, my heart is beating 3 times the speed. And then I start telling her how fantastic I thought her work is. Now I start glazing over. She's heard it all before. So I know that feeling. So I said, okay, change topic. So I started talking to her about her own life. And she told me she'd married this Italian and they were living in Rome. She was no longer with Mel Ferrer, who I later acted with. And she said, I said, so how do you balance Hollywood and being in Rome? And she said, I don't think about Hollywood much. And I couldn't picture her as a housewife in Rome. So I said, what do you think about? And she then talked to me about caring about the unfortunate, the underprivileged, the children of the world that were going to sleep hungry. And she said, we can feed them all. It's just that we don't do it. And I really want to do something for these people. And years later, she did something about that. And she became a UN ambassador. And she received America's highest award, the Presidential Medal, for her work as a philanthropist. So her words were not just empty words. She actually went out and did something. But what was very interesting about my meeting with Audrey Hepburn was she told me she had great interest in Rabindranath Tagore. And she wanted to know if I knew him. I said, well, I don't know him personally. He passed away many years ago, but I did spend a year of my life in Shantiniketan. And so the conversation continued. Then another diva I absolutely was gobsmacked with came and joined us, and my conversation with Audrey Hepburn ended. But it's a meeting I'll never forget because she had the radiance of a natural star. And it was heart-stopping to be sitting and talking to someone you admire so enormously. And such a wonderful star she was. There have been various other great people I've met along the way, including the Dalai Lama, including John Paul II, including my mother's guru, the Karmapa. Extraordinary people that are Jiddu Krishnamurti, the philosopher. Many people that I've written about in my book too, because my book is full of lots of interesting people and places. But I think my meeting with Audrey stands out in my mind greatly. And of course, being blown away by meeting Sean Connery, because he was the ultimate bond for me and is still the ultimate bond for me, with Daniel Craig coming a close second.
So how did you handle your success? I mean, there was a time when you were out at a department store in Spain. You had to be evacuated in a sense because there were just so many fans and the store may collapse. So how do you think you handled it well? Or in hindsight, you would have done things differently?
No, I think I handled success quite well. But, there was a strange edge to my success. I was enormously successful as Sandokan.
Yes.
And at the same meeting, at the same party where I met Audrey Hepburn, I talked to a filmmaker. And I said, how is it that with all the success I have, being on every television show, on every magazine cover, in every newspaper, every radio station, why am I not being inundated with offers from Italian filmmakers? And he said, Kabir, you're Sandokan. We make social, political films, comedies. We can't have Sandokan walking into the film. It'll spoil the story. And then I realized, my God, am I going to be a one success wonder in the country, my greatest success? And I realized that I had to step out of Italy, push beyond, prove to them that I was a multi-dimensional actor before I came back. And that's one of the reasons that took me to Hollywood. And that's actually what happened. When they saw me playing various other roles, they called me back to play many other roles, which towards the end of my life resulted in my being knighted by the Italian government, which is the highest civilian honor. So it's been a complex, multi-layered life to live. Even success, as I said, had its problems, and as do failures and setbacks and wrenching losses. All of them pose enormous dilemmas, decisions. There was a time in Hollywood when I was facing a really bad time because of bad investments I'd made.
Yes.
And I was facing almost ruin. how do you rise from that? So it's not a question of how do you handle success, how do you handle failure as well? Both are equally valid questions, and both have different answers because you have to reach for different parts of yourself to overcome or to deal with what's in front of you.
You have risen from that, but I would like to, if it's okay with you, ask you a couple of personal questions. And, if you don't want to answer, I totally understand. But one of your most profile relationships was with Parveen Bobby. She was at the height of her career as well. I think for the public, it was just a little bit much later that we figured out about the mental health issues. And you, of course, from what I gather from the book, learned much earlier. How is it to have a relationship with a person who's struggling mentally in such a massive way?
Just what you have to realize is that Parveen was a very intelligent, sensitive, capable girl. This is a girl who came from a little town in Gujarat called Junagadh and became a major star in Bollywood. It takes a lot of guts, grit, and talent to do that. So she had that in her. The relationship we had was very intense, and it's a very passionate love. But it was overshadowed by the mental issues that she had, and certainly created problems. And what happens is that if you love somebody and they're going through problems like that, you want to be their protector. You want to look after them. You want to see them through this. You want to have them healed. You want the problem fixed because you love them. And this was one of the dilemmas that I faced in my relationship with her, because she had a mortal fear of her mental state being discovered by the industry, by people, because there was so much stigma attached to it. She feared the industry would drop her. And therefore she resisted any attempt, because she even doubted doctors, paranoia sets in, doubted doctors. So I think one of the reasons why our relationship ended was because I wanted her healed and she didn't want to deal with it, because she didn't see the problem in the same way that I did. And it's a very complex issue and a very thing fraught with many deep emotional issues, which I've shared in a very vivid way in my book. And to experience that journey of what it's like to fully answer the questions you asked, the only way to know that is to read my book. That's the only way you can know that, because that's what I've sketched out with the greatest honesty that I could.
For me, personally, I think the most heartbreaking chapter was when you wrote about Siddharth, what you wrote about Siddharth. And there's something I want to share with you. So when I joined school, when I joined Sinan, the first day I joined with another girl who became a dear friend and has also unfortunately passed away. Both of us were completely lost at school. We had no friends. I mean, we knew nobody, and you know how it is in boarding schools. You're just left and gone. And so we had to turn up at some hobby where these scared 13-year-olds turned up, not knowing anybody, everybody staring at us. We didn't know what to do. We kept standing at the door, and it was Siddharth who came up to us. And he's the first person who walked up to us, told us, "You girls are new, I'm Siddharth." He introduced himself, and then he introduced us to everybody in the class and made us feel comfortable. I have never forgotten that. That was the kind of person I remember him, and that is the kind of person I have, you have reinforced for me in the book. How tough was it to write that chapter?
How tough was it?
To write that chapter.
It was tough to write that chapter. It was very tough because I wanted to write that chapter because I wanted people to know what it is like to be in that situation and what kind of person he was. But I had to relive a lot of what I went through. And it's not a question of somebody dealing with mental illness. The story really is about a father trying to prevent his son committing suicide. That's the story. And what he has to do to try and prevent that. So I had to go back into all those times, all those scenes, and write about it in a way that, in the same way that I felt it, I wanted to communicate it. In the same way that things happened, I wanted to share them. And that was the essence of that story. And that's the beauty of that story. Because it shows Siddhartha the wonderful, caring person he was. A boy, a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, brilliant enough to go there with the best of the internet age before him at the dawn of the internet age. And then he struck down with this. And how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with his issues? Because, in a situation like that, it's not just the afflicted that's involved. The caregivers are equal sufferers because they're caring for somebody they love. And the person they love is not the person they knew. He has changed in some dramatic, deep way, and you deal with that. So that's the harder part of it. That's the harder part of it. And the problem is dealing with the stigma of that, which all families dealing in these kinds of situations have to face. And I think that stigma should be reduced and eliminated because there are physical maladies and there are mental maladies. And there's no reason why mental maladies should be stigmatized in the way they are, because today, especially with today's medications, a lot of them are certainly manageable, if not treatable. And in many cases, there have been amazing success stories. 4 years after Siddhartha passed away, this film came out called A Beautiful Mind, with Russell Crowe playing John Nash, the scientist who beat schizophrenia. And I wondered if Siddhartha seeing that would have given him more hope, changed his life in some way. Because, when you lose somebody in those situations, it's not just the sorrow of loss, it's the guilt you feel. You always feel that you could have somehow done something different to change that outcome. But everybody connected with that person feels that, not just you. It's something that's part of that existence. But I choose to remember the beautiful boy he was, the brilliant mind he was, the caring, sharing, joyous being that he was. And it's wonderful that I was able to write about him in that way and share that experience with my readers.
I think it was a wonderful tribute to him. So it really was. I mean, I had to take a break after reading that chapter because I wanted to just, internalize everything that you'd written. But
it touches people very deeply. It touches people very deeply. That's why books are such an immersive experience, because what you get out of that chapter, you will not get out of any film, any audiovisual experience. It's something you have joined. You're part of my thinking and feeling, and you immerse yourself in that. And that experience, no other medium can give you in that kind of intensity.
Which is why I say that, you've succeeded with your book, because it connects at that very basic level that a book should connect with. But also talking about, I'm going to go back just a little bit, and I know you have to go, so I'm going to do this really quickly. But as when you were a son, what was it like growing up with your parents with such diverse, philosophies that, they digress into completely different aspects of life from where they began as fascinating freedom fighters?
My book is full of lots of stories. As you see, I've structured it as stories. So there are stories of Pratima, Parveen, my son, America, Italy, various things. But the story of my parents is one of the stories that is one of the most interesting also, because they were such incredible and unusual people. People who gave up everything for the freedom struggle. People that literally had no money when they fought against colonialism and the British rule in India. And my mother was a handpicked satyagrahi of Gandhi. And my father was this communist. And the wonderful scenes of that I leave for people to read in the book. But the fact is that after independence, they didn't sit around or seek the rewards of their sacrifices like many freedom fighters did and become ministers and chief ministers, etc. They carried on with their social service, and each found a different form of spiritualism, And my father became this very progressive New Age philosopher in Italy. And my mother discovered Buddhism and went on to become a Buddhist nun. And there were both these streams of the Sikh tradition from my father, the Buddhist tradition from my mother, all affecting me, all shaping me in my years of growing up. And the story of how two people in love find different paths. My mother goes off to a monastery, my father goes off to Italy, and yet divided by continents, divided by beliefs, how these two still remain soulmates to the end of their lives is one of the most touching stories I know. And I was just so fortunate to have such incredible parents and to share of their lives and be blessed by their presence. And I always believe it's their blessings that have seen me through my worst times. And it is a great joy to me that some of my greatest successes, like in Italy and Sandokan and stardom there, were seen by my mother, by my father, and before they passed on. So those are things that matter a lot to children. They want their parents to be proud of them. And I certainly had parents who were proud of what I did.
No, I think we have so many unsung heroes from the freedom struggle. And I think a lot of us need to dig in and find more information about that. And I'm hoping maybe you will come up with another book. And I have to absolutely let you go. But I have two very, very quick last questions. One is that, through the book, there has been a theme. You talked about spirituality just now, but I found the whole spirituality theme connected with you as well. And have you found what you've been searching for?
Just yes, in many ways, yes, in many ways, no. There's a whole chapter on there on my spiritual beliefs and what was given to me, what I found as a seeker along that path. And I've always admired the beauty of religion, organized religion, for giving people the sense of belonging, for giving people the rites of passage from birth and marriage and death, a set of beliefs, places to worship. These are very special things, and organized religion plays a tremendous role in them. And each religion has their philosophies. My question was, what is philosophically the truth of different beliefs between Christians and Muslims and Hindus, etc. And I must say, I found some of my deepest answers in Hinduism and Buddhism, etc. But I won't get into the detail on that right now, because my beliefs are a kind of fruit salad I've taken from different religions of what matters to me. And it's all in my book, and I've shared that journey with great care and explained myself with great care. Where did we all come from? What is the truth? Is there free will? Is there destiny? Are there souls? Are there rebirths? I mean, what's the truth of it all? Is there heaven and hell? Is there, God and devils? What's the truth of it all? That's been part of my quest, and what I've discovered is in my book.
One of my favorite quotes was, "Shine your torch on whatever matters the most, leave the rest in darkness." My final question.
That's right. That's right.
Is, do you think you lived life on your terms?
I have lived a very interesting life, a very unusual life.
Yes.
I won't say in my terms, because my terms would mean that I could do what the hell I want when I want. There are times in my life when I've really struggled with events, with setbacks, etc. But I've had a very fulfilling life, and I've been blessed in so many ways. It doesn't take away the pain that I've suffered in relationships that went wrong, or losses that I suffered, or terrible financial humiliations that I faced along the way. But that's part of being human. It's part of being the human condition, the wondrous journey of life, which all of us go through. You have your sorrows, you have your joys, you have your setbacks, you have your heartbreak. We all have it, different ways, in different places. We all share that. Mine is a slightly different level because it's across 3 continents and I'm dealing with film industries and film stars. But it's the same emotion. It's the same emotion, the same feeling. And what it's like to be in those situations, that as you see, you discovered in my book. And I really must say, I must thank people for all these wonderful messages they're sending and all these
Italian
hearts
ones,
that they.
when to say, I won't be able to interpret, only you will be. But I
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
to take these questions, but I think we'll have to do that another day because I promised you half an hour, and I'll definitely on.
Yeah. Before we go, Jyotsna, is there one chapter that sort of jumped out at you the most, or touched you the most, or that you think is your favorite chapter, or is it the
You know,
totality?
I told you about Siddharth, but I'll tell you the chapter that begins with your ramblings on the beach.
Ramblings on the Beach. Yeah.
Beautiful. If I had to give any award for writing, it would be right there and then to you for ramblings on the beach.
Right. That's a very philosophical chapter, and it was written originally. The beginning of that chapter was written as a little short story for
Yes,
Khushwant Singh, and he put it in his best short stories from India. And I have
that's
to thank Khushwant for many things, including telling me how to write a book by putting down the phone and creating the right hours, creating hours to write it. And he was a friend of the family from Lahore days, but remained a friend even when he was here, when he was editor of the Illustrated Weekly. And I attended his literary festival in his honor by his son in Kasauli, and recently in London. So there's a big link with Khushwant Singh, and he's advised me, phone chak ke rakh deo, and spend so many hours a day writing it.
No, I took that advice from you as well. Phone check ke rakh deo and then write, because otherwise the phone is constantly buzzing.
It's all
and
consuming.
Distracted. But it's been a wonderful book, and it's been my absolute pleasure to speak with you. We all take what we have to from your books, but I want to tell you that my 9-year-old has particularly taken the part that you still eat 3 fried eggs every day, because she eats a fried egg every day, and her dream is to eat 3, which we don't allow. So I told her that was her takeaway from your book. But fantastic book, The Lahore Connections, we will talk about another day, sir.
Right.
We need to dig into that as well. But it was my absolute pleasure. Please, everybody, go out and buy Stories I Must Tell. There will be more, I am sure, of those stories. But until then, thank you for joining, and goodbye.
Bye.